Hello, everyone, and thank you all for signing up and attending today. We are set to welcome over 150 attendees to this event on race and sport, and we are very much appreciative of your time during a summer that has again shown how vitally important this subject is. My name is Greg Johnson. I'm head of regional sport for Reach PLC, and today we'll be chairing the discussion with our brilliant panelists, Anyika Onuora and Gurmej Singh Pawar. So please allow me to introduce them both to you properly. Anyika Onuora is a former Olympian who won bronze at Rio 2016 and has also won medals in the relay as an individual sprinter in the World and European Championships. Anyika is the host of Hidden Greatness podcast, which is all about how talented people can use their subconsciousness to find success, and is releasing her autobiography, My Hidden Race, in March 2022 through Reach Sport. Anyika is also ambassador for Malaria No More UK and a columnist for Reach's Olympic newsletter, The Torch, which is running throughout the summer's Olympic Games on the Mirror and all other titles. Hello, Anyika, and welcome to the panel.
Hi, Greg. Great to be here.
Oh, thank you for coming. How are you today?
Great, good. Thanks. Good, all good.
Cracking. And of course, we have Gurmej Singh Pawar as well, who is CEO of Gurmej Media and chairman of hockey club Barford Tigers. He is co-founder of Hockey All In, a group that works to address racism, elitism, and promote diversity and inclusion in hockey. In 2020, Gurmej prompted England Hockey to review access and talent identification in hockey as a sport after going public about issues of race and class in hockey, which he identified as having lost touch with modern-day Britain. He is also host of the podcast COVID, Opportunity and Isolation. Welcome, Gurmej. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me on here, Greg.
Well, thank you for coming. And lastly, a little bit about Reach PLC. We are the largest digital publisher in the UK for news and sport, with national titles such as The Mirror and regional titles such as Manchester Evening News, Liverpool Echo, Newcastle Chronicle, Wales Online, and Football.London, to name a few. This event was organised by Reach Culture, who are part of the company's diversity and inclusion networks. That cover LGBT+, social mobility, access and disability, and so much more. Reach Culture is the diversity and inclusion network on race and ethnicity, and we are working hard to ensure Reach PLC and the wider media landscape is more representative of the country as a whole, both in terms of our coverage, recruitment, and so much more. So anyway, enough about who we are, and on to the point of today's panel. If at any point you do have questions throughout the event, please do drop a question in the comments. We'll do our very best to answer as many as possible at the end in the Q&A section of the event. So, first question in our panel discussion. Before the Olympics even started, there was already lots of incidents related to race, and there's been a few that have happened during the Games as well. So, we had the banning of swimming caps for afro hair before the Games. A number of black female runners appeared to be disproportionately affected around disqualifications for physiological reasons. There was a German cycling coach who was sent home for racist abuse. And Olympic official broadcasters initially banned images of athletes taking the knee, only to U-turn after pressure on the decision. Kind of left a few questions for some people saying, is the Olympics itself racist? So what are your thoughts on that, Anyika?
Ooh, that's a long list. Unfortunately, it is a long list. Do you know what? There are definitely levels of discrimination. It's kind of unfortunate that a lot of this has had to unravel that over the past couple of weeks, couple of months. You know, a lot of things have been happening over the past year or so, especially within my sport. For example, with the DSD athletes, Casa Semenya taking her case to CAS. It's just discrimination one after the other. And then to add to that, the ongoing racism that we actually have in the sport that people don't want to always address, because honestly, it does make a lot of people feel extremely uncomfortable. I don't think that some people are ready to have this conversation, but I believe that the good thing that's happening what's been happening over the past year is that people are being much more open. And we do need more allies. It shouldn't be on the black athletes to have these, discussions. It should literally be on white people as well. Because you're not necessarily the ones who are being discriminated on a daily basis. And I'm glad mostly that people are starting to see it now. Because even outside of the Olympics and the ongoing racism that the athletes have to encounter, you've also got everyone also saw how things unfolded at the Euro final in Wembley, which was an unfortunate incident. But yeah, it's definitely disappointing. But the good thing is we are having this open discussion. So yeah, let's start somewhere.
No, absolutely. I mean, Gurmej, I guess in the hockey world, this is something that you focused on last year when you kind of called out England hockey on the issues you've noticed and recognised. Obviously, there's been actually a lot of focus on diversity in hockey in the Team GB team at the Olympics this year. What are your kind of thoughts on the Olympics itself and some of the issues raised there?
Yeah, I think first of all, mentioning the diversity in the Olympics and the GB team, I'd say definitely with the women. I mean, I'm really proud of what the women have done and over the last year or so to try and educate themselves, and they've gone out of their way, independently to do that. And I was really proud of them to see that they did take the knee at the Olympics. And then when we look at some of the things that have happened around the Olympics, you've got Alice Deering, who has a certain genetic trait, and her hair grows in a certain way, which is shared by many women around the world. And she chose not to wear a traditional swim cap and had one made for her that fit her better. And she was told that it didn't fit the natural form of the head. Now, I'm kind of wondering how they came up with that that theory that that this cap shouldn't be allowed in the Olympics. I mean, is there some science behind it? Because I think it was very ambiguous, and I think it just left more questions than anything. And then you've got the German cycling coach who's referred to the Eritrean and Algerians as, I think it was, camel drivers. And again, it's some of the ingrained views of some in Western countries about their non-white counterparts. I mean, I know, having heard from some of the stories in hockey camps in this country about some coaches referring to, for example, the Pakistani team as coming from a poorer country, and therefore England or GB should wipe the floor with them. And at the end of the day, sport reflects society. And unfortunately, there are race equality issues in society, and it won't change overnight. And it definitely won't change unless we have sort of more diverse thinking from a top down and a bottom up.
No, absolutely. And I think the Olympics, given that it's meant to be this great opportunity to bring the world together in sport, Anyika, you've competed at the Olympics within the kind of bubble of the tournament. How are these issues addressed? Do you feel that other athletes have supported you in the past? How does it feel from the inside?
It's a tough one, because previously when I've competed at the Olympic Games, I'm extremely proud to be British, but there have been instances in the past where I haven't necessarily felt British. So we're all about unity and coming together and being as one. And I think that was the whole ethos and slogan with Team GB and the BOA, etc. But sometimes when you're a person of colour, you're not necessarily treated the same way. So when I've been outspoken about certain things to management in the past, when I've said things that have occurred and I've just been unhappy with it, sometimes I've been deemed the problematic one. I've been told, just kind of know your place. You should be grateful to be here. Just focus on the job. But that shouldn't necessarily be the case. And unfortunately, as well, the problem is when I've dealt with these issues, especially when it is to do with race and being told, oh, you're the aggressive one, it's always that horrible, awful trait that Black women have to put up with, like, are seen as the loud, aggressive type, which isn't necessarily the case. It's not even a case, rather. Like Gurmej was saying, is that because you've got the same people in the same positions for years, especially in my sport, you haven't necessarily had any change. So it's the same faces making the same decisions, and they don't realize, like, their decisions ultimately impact athletes like myself. The good thing is, moving forward, so over the past year, because we have, like I was saying before, been so open about these discussions related to race and equality and diversity and all these different things, For the first time ever, British athletics have a team coach, head coach who is Black, and we've never had that before. And people always say, well, what's the significance? Like, why should it matter? Why should it be based on colour? When you've never been discriminated against in your life, like, that's something that you would never ever understand. Like, you can go and apply for a job, and you'll have all these credentials on your CV, but people won't necessarily see your colour. They wouldn't see you if you're non-Black. They won't see that. But when you're a Black person, unfortunately, I've been told, from when I was a young girl, I know a lot of Black people have been told. I know a lot of people of colour have been told you always have to work twice as hard or 10 times as hard than your white counterparts. And unfortunately, that's just how it is in society. I want to see change. I do believe that change is coming. The likes of Christian Malcolm being in the position that he's in, alongside Darren Campbell, who's also head coach of the sprint relay team as well. It's starting to show that slowly we are starting to make changes. And then you see it filtering in other areas as well. You see people of colour moving into, sitting on the board, sitting within meetings, executive director positions. Like, these are the changes that ultimately impact how the sport is going to move forward. And that, I believe, is what we all want to see.
Absolutely. I think it's true that a lot of the discussions that happen around how things move forward in football as well, in terms of directors of football and people working at the top of football clubs as well. I think, Gurmej, it comes back to what you kind of raised the alarm on with hockey last year as well, because I know you're very passionate about the systematic issues of access, which cut across both class and race as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think sometimes people, we've been brought up to think of racism as being binary, that you're either racist and a really bad person, or non-racist and a good person. And racism is a lot deeper than that. There's interpersonal racism, which is, the slights that people might make towards you, or, for example, when I was growing up at school, getting called a paki. Or there's the institutional racism, which happens within the institutions. And then there's the structural racism. And when we talked about structural racism in hockey, there's the lack of facilities, for example, for young kids in inner cities. Like our club, Barford Tigers, we have kids who come to our training on scholarships, and they are free school meals kids. And to qualify for free school meals, your parents need to be earning under £7,000 a year. Now, I mean, I don't know how people can possibly live off that. But then you're asking these kids who might have a great talent to play hockey. And if they are talented and seem to go through the talent system, they might be asked to pay £90 to go to a talent centre, a regional or a national talent centre. And then when they get there, they roll up to this talent centre. Maybe someone's taken them to the England hockey camp, and they see all the fancy cars outside and all the supportive parents and the coaches who don't look like them or sound like them, and they feel excluded. There's no one there who kind of represents them and can talk to them on their level. And then, as Anyika said, like, if they say something that could be out of sorts, they could be made to feel like they're the troublemaker, and they don't feel part of the system. And this isn't an issue that is exclusive to hockey. I know it happens in other sports as well. And I think that that's what people don't understand when we talk about the structure of discrimination.
Oh, absolutely. Anyika, is that reflected in athletics still as well, do you think?
As much as I would like to say, no, it doesn't. But yeah, I think it's definitely still ongoing. What I've noticed watching the Olympics, especially as an outsider, first of all, it's weird watching the games for the first time, especially when I've been to the last three. But secondly, watching it and kind of seeing like the media coverage. First of all, you've got the language that's used with certain journalists. So it's like there's always been this thing that it's always kind of made me feel uncomfortable. And I'm going to use this as an example. So in my former events, for example, so you got the sprint, you got the 100 meters, 200 meters, And 100 meters especially is deemed as the blue ribbon event, you know, with the likes of Bolt and, you know, just how incredible he was as an athlete. But because most of the sprinters have always been Black, it seems that the media have always tried to paint this thing where when a white sprinter comes in and they're doing really, really well, they're making finals, potential medalists, they're deemed as the great white hope.
Yeah.
Whereas in other sports, when have you ever heard that? And the thing is, also, no one calls them out on it. Whereas the athletes have always constantly said, especially the Black athletes, like, no one ever says, oh, you've got the great Black hope in other sports. Since when has Lewis Hamilton been called the great Black hope ever? Given how dominant he's been in F1 for over 10, 12 years, it honestly doesn't make any sense. So there's kind of that. But again, because of the most of the media are white, they just feel like, oh, well, it's okay to use this language. It's deemed as okay, you know. So there's that, which is obviously uncomfortable. And then you've got the whole conversation around the DSD athletes. So with you got Casa Semenya, who wasn't able to compete because they told her to take the medication. She refused. So she wasn't able to compete. As a DSD athlete, you're not able to compete in the 8 and the 4, the 8 and the 1500 meters. They said you do 5 or above or below 4, so 2 and 1 sprints. And so Casta didn't get the standard for the 5,000. Then you got 2 DSD athletes, I think from Namibia, I believe, who had been running exceptionally well in the 400 meters. And I was looking at these girls all summer and watching their performances. I was like, yes, they're ready to compete. But I know because of the internal pressures that's going on within World Athletics, they're going to pull the rug from these 2 girls and they're not going to give them the opportunity to compete in the 400, given the fact that everyone now knows they're classed as the DSD athletes. So then World Athletics then said, you're not allowed to compete in the 4, so you have to compete in the 2. So the 2 girls were like, okay, that's cool. So the IAAF the World Athletics and probably the IOC wasn't expecting these girls to run as quick as they did. And one of them got silver and she ran the world junior record 3 times, ran an African record. Like she just ran phenomenal. And then the other athlete as well finished 5th in the race. So there's just been all this question marks around it. And like, it just honestly feels like it's just constant levels of discrimination, especially against Black women in the sport. You've got, like Gurmej was saying about Alice, you know, and the caps, and, you know, the fact that why has this only been brought up now? Why is this conversation happening on the eve of the Olympics? What, like, right into the Olympics? Why is this even a discussion? Because given the fact that the majority of swimmers are white, why is it being targeted towards the Black athletes? So, like I was saying, I'm glad that people are able to see what's going on, but it also tells a bigger part in how the media are also portraying these stories. You know what I mean? So yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, speaking from the media side, I mean, I think there are some cliches out there which need to be tackled and taken out of circulation, like pace and power, referring to athletes as beasts or monsters and stuff. I don't think it really is helpful or very fair at all. What I would say is, if anyone does have any questions who are watching the discussion, please do drop them into the chat below, and we will do our very best to pick some up, either during the discussion or at the end in the Q&A as well. But Anyika, you mentioned Euro 2020 as well, in the final, and the reaction to Rashford, Sancho and Saka there as well. Gurmej, as someone who's involved in a team sport, you know, how is race kind of tied into how individuals are kind of picked out of those team situations, you think? And what was your reaction to what happened in the Euros?
You know, I think I've heard so many people say this, that when the 3 lads missed the penalties, they knew exactly what was going to happen, and that was going to be that those 3 lads were going to get targeted online with some online abuse, which is, you know, obviously abhorrent. But then, you know, I also think back to some of the politicians before the Euros talking about the players taking the knee as being gesture politics, and that just really kind of, grated with me, because I just thought to myself, here's Priti Patel, who is the daughter of an immigrant, and she is in a position of power, and she's playing politics with this, and myself as a son of an immigrant, what I'd like to say to Priti Patel is that it's because people have taken a stand against racism in the years before, and are continuing to do so now, that she's been able to get into the position that she's got into. So I thought that was an abhorrent comment from somebody in her position. Regardless of her race or her background, it was an abhorrent comment, and it kind of just stoked the flames, really. So was I surprised by what happened after the Euros, after they those three guys missed the penalties? No, I wasn't. And yeah, I think social media companies have got a responsibility to do more about this, but I think the general media and how they sort of portray players of all colours have got a role to play in that as well.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned the knee there. I think there's been an announcement that the Premier League clubs will continue taking the knee as a stand against racism for the forthcoming season. Anyika, there was that decision at the start of the Olympic Games that the broadcaster wasn't going to show images of that. Now, there's some iconic moments in the past, especially black athletes kind of standing on the pedestal and raising their fist very, very famously in the Olympics. What did you make of the reaction there to the official broadcaster not wanting to show those images, and eventually them caving and having a U-turn when pressure built on that decision?
Yeah, I actually saw some images of the athletes taking the knee. Not so much I don't think we've had it so much in track and field, but definitely in football, I saw some of the male and female footballers taking the knee, and even when it was on TV, I was like, oh, are they going to keep it on? Are they going to show it? Is this something that it's going to get taken off? But no, it needs to be shown, because people just think, oh, it's just happening in football. And so I know fans, right? I know how football fans are, unfortunately, especially after watching the demise of how they reacted to the Euros. But what annoys me is them saying they're sick and tired of seeing people taking the knee. Like, they're sick and tired of it. Like I was saying before, when you've never been discriminated against, you will never know what it's like to actually have an understanding of what it's like to just be a person of color, or someone who is just dealing with everyday racism. And that's what I was saying before as well about the need for allies. Like, it's important in terms of how it's shown in the media, having these conversations amongst friends, amongst family, amongst teammates. I always say Google is free. There's so many educational books out there. It's not for us to do the work, but it's for everyone to make sure that they are included in the conversation and to keep it going. So now that we know that the footballers are going to take the knee, continue to take the knee next season, that makes me happy. And the football fans will have to just deal with it. Like, let's just continue to just build momentum. Like, that's the only way that we're going to continue to see change and have an understanding of how it's not just going to be something we're going to do for a small bit of window for some activism, where no, it has to be ongoing in order to see change.
No, absolutely. I think that's a useful kind of segue to our next kind of talking point in the panel discussion, which is role models, really. And we'll stick with you, Anyika, because talking about the footballers and then taking the knee, I think they are inspirational figures especially to a lot of young people. And I think we're probably seeing more of what we maybe saw in NBA and other sports coming through to footballers kind of taking certain responsibilities on themselves. I think Marcus Rashford and the free school meals is a great example of that. But who were your role models in sport growing up, and why were they important to you?
Oh, I have a lot. I have a few. So probably, well, given I'm being biased, so my sport was athletics. So growing up in the 90s, I loved seeing the likes of Linford Christie, Kelly Holmes. My biggest inspiration, I remember, was probably Denise Lewis. So seeing Denise Lewis perform at Sydney Olympics to win gold, I even remember watching, and when I was very, very young, I'm not going to say my age, but watching the Atlanta Olympics and when she got silver. So to see her when I was like 15, 16 to win gold in Sydney, that pretty much changed everything, because there's nothing wrong with being inspired by people who look like you.
Mm.
And the reason why I say that is because there was a moment when growing up in Liverpool, there's, it's multicultural, but, there are a lot of white people here. So growing up in Liverpool, when I trained at Wavertree, there weren't many black people, there weren't, many black athletes. But everyone was very warm and welcoming. I love training with so many different people. But I only really saw the effects when it came to identity and race when I came back to Liverpool, and I came back from Liverpool and I did a training session after the Rio Olympic Games. So the club, I came down with my medal as well. So the club were like, "Yeah, bring your medal down." I wasn't in Liverpool very often, just given my time and the schedule and stuff. So when the kids came and they saw the medal, they were like just in awe of it. But then when I was actually in the middle of my session, I saw this one little black girl watching me. And I remember my mum came down the track, and this little girl ended up talking to my mum and was like picking her brain about me. And she was just like, "Oh, I'm just in awe of Anyika. I watched you in the Olympics. Like, I can't believe it." So what I ended up doing on my last rep, I think I did like 6 150s. I just said to her, "Let's go. Like, do you want to do the last 150 with me?" And she was like, "Oh, yeah, let's do it." And she spiked up. She got her spikes on, and I was like, "Okay, you lead us off." And she didn't beat me, but it was great for her. It was great for her. Like, I didn't realize in that moment just how impactful being an actual role model was. When I see young black girls sending me messages, being open about like racism and body image and, having to deal with, discrimination that I haven't been able to talk about before. But it also makes you realize you're in a position of power, because in order to see change, you have to have these girls look up to someone who's been in that position and just being a voice for the next generation. So again, going back to your original question, I was also inspired by, outside of athletics, the Williams sisters. So, Venus and Serena Williams just dominating tennis, being in a predominantly white sport as well, just being in awe of them. And again, these women had to face continuous discrimination. "Oh, you can't wear this. You can't wear the catsuit. You can't, you're getting fined for throwing your racket." It was just constantly ongoing with these things. Whereas when some of the white players have done it, definitely saw Djokovic lose his rag at the Olympic Games just last week when he threw his racket, but there was definitely no fine there. Whereas when it's Serena Williams or when it's a woman of colour, it's always a big deal. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's important to have these role models, because unfortunately we do have a responsibility, but now we are in a position where we are able to freely speak up and have these conversations like we are right now.
No, absolutely. And now that you've stepped away from the track and you're a commentator on sport, you've got your book coming out in March 2022 as well. What do you feel your role now is, as I guess, a role model who's retired from the track, but is still an important voice and kind of example to the next generation?
Yeah, I definitely just want to continue to just use my voice. I think when the book comes out next year, March 2022, people will have a better understanding of just the different things that I encountered. So yes, there will be some issues on race, but there'll be a whole other things that I dealt with, and I just never felt a position to speak about it. Like, I didn't necessarily feel protected in some spaces. I didn't necessarily feel safe as well. And also, like, your identity and your race also comes into play in that. In like, for example, how a white athlete is treated compared to a black athlete. So when I see young girls messaging me and telling me how they feel much more encouraged to speak out and have these open conversations, it honestly makes me happy. So I haven't got a choice whether I want to be a role model or not. I'll just continue to have my voice being heard.
No, absolutely. And Gurmej, who were your role models growing up in sport for yourself?
Oh man, like, I used to like a lot of different sports. From hockey, I mean, Imran Shawani from the 1988 Olympics, scoring the winning goals, he was like a role model. Then, I looked at basketball, people like, obviously, Michael Jordan, Shaquille O'Neal. But, you know, Anyika was talking about the Williams sisters. And for me, they just represent progress, because let's face it, they don't have a typical story. Tennis is a very much a white, probably middle-class dominated sport. And they've made a difference. Is what so many inner city kids believe that they can now be. And you know, I'm definitely not a role model for my lack of sporting achievements. But when I think about who I want my own kids to kind of look up to, I just want them to believe that they can be anything they want to be, and that their colour, and that the kids who come to our training on Sunday mornings at Barford Tigers, their colour and their race shouldn't be a prohibiting factor in their success in sport.
Absolutely. And who do you view as kind of your biggest allies, especially in the hockey world, to help make sport more inclusive? And what part do you think the media need to play in this area as well?
Yeah, so going back to last year when we looked at writing this letter to England Hockey, and there were a few clubs that I approached from around the country, especially some of the more ethnically diverse ones, because there's only a handful. And I thought that they would all kind of come together and want to do this. But what I was kind of hearing from a lot of them was that they didn't want to get involved. They were a bit scared of the backlash from England Hockey if they wrote this letter to them. And that kind of worried me a little bit, because I know even people within my own club wouldn't have liked me to have written that letter at that time. And then I thought that it would be mainly the sort of more ethnically diverse community who'd be sort of the allies. But, you know, I was really pleasantly surprised when, you know, I was getting people messaging me from around the country after the letter was published in The Guardian, from all backgrounds and all sorts of areas of the country, just saying they wanted to support the cause. And we kind of came up with this core group who said that, you know what, we want to be part of a movement here to make England Hockey listen and change the way that they're doing things. And the allies, I've got to say, like, just a massive thank you to the sort of core group of people who stuck with me from the start, really, in this challenge, because it is a challenge. It's not like a straight upward curve in progress, and there's a long way to go.
Absolutely. Anyika, in terms of allies that you've kind of helped you along the way, or that you look for support or for solidarity at the moment, who do you think is playing the biggest part in making positive change happen in athletics now?
I think definitely, like I was saying before, having someone like Christian Malcolm as a black coach, and, you know, the likes of Darren Campbell, and even before them, Paula Dunn, who I have to give a big shout out to her, because she has really just been doing so much work behind the scenes. She, for example, whenever I had an issue with anything to do with race or discrimination, I felt like I always had to go to Paula. Paula Dunn is basically a black woman in power. She's head of the Paralympic team. But the problem is, Paula doesn't run the Olympic program. She doesn't manage or take care of the athletes who are on the Olympic team, world champs. Her side is more Paralympic. My only saving grace is because I've known Paula since I was a junior athlete, and I have a really, really good relationship with her. Whereas before that wasn't necessarily the case. So that's why now we are starting to see changes, like bringing Christian Malcolm in, bringing Darren Campbell in, having other people within the organisation actually make space and just taking a step back. So you've got I believe Louise Woodward stepped down from her position as the president of Team England, or the Commonwealth Games Federation, last year, because of everything that was, that conversations that we're now having. So she was willing to, take a step back and just say, give my position to a person of colour. My only issue with that is, like, why should it be on Louise as a woman? Because everyone wants to tick this diversity box, and sometimes it's okay to have like a woman in position. But why should it be Louise? Why can't it be any of the other white men who are in? Like, how can you allow this woman to do this, to basically step down from her position and my understanding was from when I've met Louise, she always did a fantastic job, but why should it be on her? Who else is trying to be an ally aside from her? So you've got that situation. And then, going back to my sports, having these conversations like I did. So last year when we did have the whole, George Floyd murder, on callous murder that happened last year, a lot of the athletes that I was speaking to weren't training. They were not in a position to train. They'd already realized that Tokyo was going to be postponed, and, their own federation were not having a discussion. But the medals come from the majority of Black athletes. So how are these people in power not having a conversation with the athletes who are hurting and suffering the most? They weren't interested in training. They were interested in protesting. They were interested in, unfortunately, watching the onslaught media, the news that was going on, seeing what was happening in Minneapolis and, the riots. And, I felt for it. But so I had to actually make a phone call I had to send an email to Paula, who then put me in contact with the new CEO of British Athletics to be like, okay, I'm retired, so this ain't on me, but you've got a duty of care for the athletes who are still trying to compete, who, you need to have these conversations. So now what we are seeing, and I don't think I really played a part in this. All I did was have a conversation. But now we are seeing within the sports, like they have regular meetings, like virtually, like they have this whole let's talk about race. They have a diversity and inclusion network. They have a whole advocacy team where, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. And I believe they've also got a plan in place for the next 4 to 5 years, just to see change within positions of power. So, not just Christian, not just Darren, but the people who do also work behind the scenes as well, because that's also been a big problem. So British Athletics have a duty of care, England Hockey, GB Hockey, they also have a duty of care, because we do want to see, other people step down from their positions, to just show us how much of an ally they really want to be.
Yeah, 100%. I think my kind of follow on from that, to both of you, we'll come to you, Anyika, first, is the flip side of it, in that, as you say, it's good that there's this kind of institutional kind of backing, as it were, coming up more so in athletics. But how much of a pressure is it on individuals to kind of have to carry the fire and push for change when, really they're athletes, they just want to do their sport? This is a big load placed on people to kind of, tackle issues which, as Gurmej said, are societal issues just reflected in sport.
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, it is on the athletes to have these conversations. Like I said, if you're a non-person of colour and you are able to wake up every day knowing that you're not going to get discriminated against, no one's going to call you, some racist remark, or you're not going to feel as though you're going to be discriminated against, even when they're in your presence, because sometimes it can be it's always the small things as well. You're walking into a room full of white people, and then they see you, or they look at your name and they go, "Oh, where are you from? Like, where are you really from?" And I always tell people, "Oh, I'm from Smithtown, or I'm from Wavertree," And they're like, "Wait, well, where's that? No, where are you really from? No, where are you really, really from?" And it's like, you're not deemed British until, because you're not white, you're not you don't have a British name or an English name, and it's just those small microaggressions. So unfortunately, it is for us to keep having these conversations, and to just continue the conversation in order to educate people.
We're going to come on to kind of actions that we'd like people to take on from this call, but just on that point specifically, because we've mentioned a couple of times now, people that obviously haven't experienced racism, what can they do to be better allies in what we're talking about here, to help carry the load, as it were, do you think, Anyika?
There's a laundry list. But there is. Sometimes it literally just starts with just stop having your head in the sand. Stop just thinking, oh, it'll go away. People get irritated. You see the fans in, I don't know, Formula One or football, and they just think, oh, yeah, let's just stop all that taking a knee now. It's Marxism. what is Marxism? You know, it's just stupid. But yeah, it's just it is about just simple education and just like I said, just being an ally. It goes as small as something like reading books or speaking to a person of color. If you were to ask me a question, it wouldn't necessarily be on me. I wouldn't necessarily cuss you out for asking me. But if you were to ask me about like my heritage or like my background or why I am ingrained the way I am, or why do you think that why did your parents tell you you had to work 10 times as hard than your white counterparts as a young girl? Well, why is that? Like, if you were to ask me simple questions, I wouldn't have a problem with that. The problem is what you do and how you receive that information. If you're one of those people who just feel yourself being attacked, then it's pointless. But I just feel like it can be simple as just Googling, it's just reading books, it's just, you know, sitting in on conversations, talking to people of color. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily object to that. I don't know how other people of color may feel, because it's tiring. It is tiring having to have these constant conversations. But we want allies. We want people to understand. We want to change the mindset of society, and the only way that we can do that is by educating ourselves in the process.
Definitely. And Gurmej, in terms of, I guess, what you've experienced in hockey, trying to kind of fight these battles as well, and you talked about the resistance or at least the lack of engagement with what you were kind of tackling there. How have you found that people have come round over the last year since you kind of went public with what you did? Have people had their eyes opened more, or are you still finding people that are resistant to it?
Yeah, I think you asked me earlier about the media, and I forgot to answer that. The media have a massive part to play in this, because if we keep having these conversations and keep recognizing that the problem hasn't gone away, then it actually puts pressure on the governing bodies to understand that they can't just brush the issues of the past and what's going on now under the carpet. And the media have a huge role to play in that. In terms of resistance, yeah, there's still resistance. I mean, I know that we've done some webinars where we've talked about different issues, some of them regarding race, and I think a lot of people still get quite defensive about that. They don't want to feel like they're being labeled as racist. It's that whole thing I was talking about before, that racism is kind of a binary thing, but it's not. This is about trying to help people understand that there are issues and how they can help be part of a solution. And I think, as John and Amici always really eloquently puts it, it's not enough to say that you're not racist. You have to be anti-racist to actively go out of your way, say that, look, this isn't good enough, this needs to change, and this is what we can do to make it better.
Completely. And just to kind of follow on from that point, to move on to our next talking point, really, I think a lot of this also comes down to leadership, and both in terms of what you talked about, Anyika, and also your work in hockey as well, Gurmej. But according to Sport England, by 2051, over a third, or 38%, of sports participants in the UK will be Black, Asian, and of other ethnic backgrounds. However, people from minority ethnic backgrounds are currently underrepresented on sports boards, the media as well. They're also less likely to volunteer in sport or be even represented in sports media as well. And that reduces the talent pool for athletes and for diverse leaders for tomorrow. So both in terms of your work with Hockey All In and also as a chairman of a hockey club, Gurmej, what do you think could and should be done about this to make sure that the next generation are going to have the diverse leaders that maybe we've lacked in the past?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I think I'd really like to understand how Sport England came to those stats and where they've got them from. But I think you need to have a plan to ensure that there's sort of equality of access to facilities and training, and just make the cost of entry for sport have a low sort of baseline, especially in sports like hockey, where it doesn't have to be really, really expensive to start. And, I think like the example that I gave earlier of having to pay £90 to go to national trials. I mean, only a small subsection of society are going to be able to afford that. And, the funders who fund the Sport England and who funds the athletes for the Olympics could argue that in the last 20 years that what they've done has been a success in the respect of GB have improved their medal tally over the last few years, and Anyika can tell you that. But at the same time, if we look at some of the legacy issues, we've still got child poverty, we've got an obesity problem in the country. So if it's not trickling down to the ground level and kids aren't getting the opportunities just to be fit and healthy and active because the environment they live in doesn't sort of promote that and they're getting into gang violence instead, then we've still got a problem. Sport can change people's lives. It can give people so many other opportunities. It can give them confidence to go on and not just become sort of top athletes, but to make something of their lives as well, just in a career sense, and stop them going down the route of getting into gangs. And you were mentioning about the volunteers as well. I look at sort of out of the Sikh community. The Sikh community has something called seva, which means service to your community, and people often do things that resonate with them. So when I look at the Sikh community, they do a lot in their local temples, or they do a lot to feed the homeless in their local area. But I don't necessarily see people from our community or the Sikh community going out and volunteering at a tennis match or volunteering at hockey, because it doesn't resonate with them, because their kids in their local area aren't playing it. So you're not going to volunteer if you don't feel that it resonates with you and your local community.
And I think we see that as well in I guess the quite surprising lack of British Asian talent breaking through into professional football as well, because given the size of the communities in England especially, you would expect there would be more British Asian professional footballers, really. And I think we've done articles in the past looking at that, and it often seems that there are kind of like community efforts to kind of get players through and getting involved, but it's so disjointed with the wider kind of talent paths into football. I guess, Anyika, in terms of athletics, you've talked about the progress we've seen with greater diversity and leadership of late. Do you think there's anything other sport organisations, other sports could learn from athletics?
Yeah, there's so much work to be done. Just going back to what Gurmej was saying, because he was making some really, really good points. And one of the things he says, which highlighted pretty much what I'm trying to explain, is accessibility and feasibility. So when you're in communities where they are in a predominantly Black and Asian community, and sometimes some people don't have that much money in the family household. Thankfully, I did what was considered a working class sport, but I also had a love affair when I was a kid for tennis, watching Serena Williams and Venus Williams, growing up. And, thankfully, Wavertree Athletic Centre is next door to the tennis centre. And when I wasn't training on the track, I would literally just go to the tennis centre next door and just watch. I wouldn't necessarily play, but I would just watch. But then when you look at the people around you, it didn't make me feel comfortable, because people, again, they don't look like you. And when you're a young girl coming up in sport, you're already dealing with identity issues because you don't see people on the track who look like you on a daily basis. But then in tennis, it's even worse. So yeah, I would just love to see change within these different organisations, UK Sport, Sport England, all these other sports, about what are you doing? What are you doing to go into communities and, setting up these different initiatives? Someone who's doing something fantastic, actually, within Liverpool is Tasha Jonas, so GB boxer, and her cousin Nikita Jonas, I think, who's an England football player. So they are encouraging, they set up this initiative where they have like summer camps within boxing, within football. They're not just encouraging kids to just play football, they're encouraging girls, they're encouraging Black and Asian girls to just, participate in this week of, sport. And, I didn't necessarily have that growing up in Liverpool. So the fact that Natasha and Nikita have these initiatives in place, and they're going into these small communities and doing it, is that something that maybe Liverpool Football Club or Everton have considered in the past? I don't know. but that's why it's also important to have role models. And then the other thing I wanted to add as well is in terms of increasing accessibility for other minorities within sport. The biggest example that I've seen so far, especially watching the Olympics, is seeing the amazing achievements of Kai White and Emily Campbell. So Kai White won Olympic silver in the BMX, and Emily Campbell also won silver in the weightlifting, so women's weightlifting. Two people of colour in what are considered minority sports. Also, to add, side notes, I wrote about this in my article that's going to drop tomorrow. So I think these two people in particular are amazing role models because they are not from track, from cycling, like GB cycling. They're not from swimming. They're not from where the medals are coming from. They also have stories like Kai. He trains at a cycling track that was built in Peckham. He's now dubbed the King or Prince of Peckham. Peckham, which has got majority Black and Asian people within the community. And you've got now this kid who's now come back and he's won an Olympic medal. Like how unheard of is that? So it's just about setting these foundations and having them in place, but also utilizing these people, the likes of Emily, first female weightlifter to get a medal for GB since forever, and for weightlifting since 1984. They're making having these historic moments within their respective sports. So the next step I would love to see is these organizations actually saying, okay, we want to utilize you, we want to do this, we want these people are role models. Otherwise, if you don't, it's just going to be a waste of an opportunity, in my opinion.
I mean, it is wonderful that people are kind of becoming those role models for their community and going back and starting initiatives. But I guess it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of that is still quite a heavy load on people to bear, and they might do it willingly because they want to see change. But to bring us to our last point, if the people watching this discussion and watching the video, if you could pick one action point that they themselves could take from this event today and bring into their lives to help address these issues, so it isn't just falling on the kind of individual heroism of the athletes to kind of do it themselves, what would that action point be and why, Anyika?
I would probably say, look at what you've done in the past. So if you're a journalist, for example, look at something as simple as the language you've used when it comes to describing maybe a person of colour within sport and how that may have looked in the past. And now that me and Gurmej have given you this information, how are you going to use this moving forward? Is this something that you're actually going to change? Are you going to make yourself actively aware of this? Are you going to continue to be an ally? Are you going to just sit there and just go, no, I've posted my black square, over a year ago, and that's as much as I want to do? No, because that's what people were doing. Yeah. People were posting the black squares. I even know brands who were posting the black squares, and then within 48 hours, they were deleting them. And they were using these ridiculous excuses saying like, oh, it doesn't look good on our social media feeds. And, we just don't believe in that. We're all one, and just coming up with the most ridiculous excuses. So I hope everyone who's watching and who's listening is able to take on board everything that me and Gurmej have said, because these little small ideas and, again, speaking from experience as a Black woman in sport, is going to help the sport move. It's going to help sports media move forward, but also create a bigger landscape and having these ongoing conversations.
Yeah, brilliant. I guess same question for you as well, Gurmej. If there was an action point that you'd like the viewers to take away and put into their own lives to help address some of the issues raised today, what would it be and why for you?
Yeah, I think I agree with Anyika. Like, going back to what I said before, ask yourself, are you an anti-racist? And the second thing would be that don't just criticize. And when I talk about criticize, don't just put your black square on your Instagram or your Twitter. Contribute as well. What can you do to contribute to improving the situation? And sometimes to do that, you have to take yourself out of the comfort zone. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes. Could that be, going going to visit a different community to your own? Could it be doing that from your own bedroom or even from your office? Because, you know, if COVID's taught us anything, that we can have chats and learn from people from around the world at a touch of a button. And there's a great what's it called now? Great app now called Lunch Club, where you subscribe every week to have a meeting with somebody sitting anywhere in the world, and you can just have a chat with them about anything for 30 minutes. I just think that's a great way to just learn about people from different parts of the world and understand that essentially we are all the same, but we just do things in a different way. We all want the same things. We all want to have a roof over our heads. We all want to be healthy and we all want to be happy, but the way that we get there might be slightly different.
That's a great suggestion. I didn't even know about that myself, so I'm about to go and check it out after this. But no, that was fantastic. And speaking of contributions, you've actually had quite a few questions through. So we're going to turn our attentions now to the Q&A and see what the viewers have been sending us in. So just to kick us off, first from John Birchall, who says, do you think we have gone backwards because of social media, or if it has just exposed racism that has always been there, but perhaps hidden in some other way? Gurmej, do you want to go first on that one?
I think that it just exposes the reality of society, because people are now able to hide behind VPNs and fake email addresses and fake accounts and just abuse people. Have we gone backwards because of it? No, I think that we've just highlighted what's always been there. But, you know, the stuff that goes on social media, it's terrible, it's abhorrent, but it doesn't scare me as much as sometimes what our politicians do from all sides, and with wolf whistles that kind of encourage this behaviour as well.
And what are your thoughts on it, Anyika?
Yeah, excuse me, pretty much what Gurmej was saying. It's definitely exposed a lot of just a lot of awful, horrid abuse that's going on behind the screens. I would, if it was me, if I was like one of these people, like I rate athletes, sorry, not athletes, but I rate the people who've been abused on social media and found out where the VPN or where their address is coming from and just pulled up at the person's house. Like, I actually rate that, because that should be a firm reminder that, you know, you can't continue to just abuse someone and just get away with it just because you hid behind the screen, or because you've got like several, I don't know, 12 or 20 accounts that you're you know, writing all this racist abuse from. Do you know how I actually thought about this the other day? Not so much the other day, but probably when the racist abuse was happening within the England team. Do you know how actively racist you must be to do, I don't know, write the N word or do the monkey chant or slide into someone's DMs and then choose to delete that account and then set up a new account and then do the same and set up a new account? Do you, like, is life that bad for you that you have to constantly just focus on making sure that this person knows how racist that they are? Like, I really don't understand it. I don't think social media's gone backwards, but like Gurmej was saying, it's definitely highlighted just how racist society is. It's not just in sport; it's in, you know, everyday society as well. So, like I said, like, the more exposure that we are in terms of having these conversations, the better.
Well, just to follow on that, Anyika, we've had another question from Connor Mummery, who asks, what would you like to see social media companies do to combat racism on these platforms? And do you agree with calls for ID requirements to create accounts as well?
I definitely agree with calls for IDs. Oh, sorry, calls for ID. I definitely agree with ID requirements for sure. Like, let's just expose them. Like, that's the only way that it can be done. Why are you setting up 20 accounts just to do monkey chants, or just to, like, you know, just to abuse, like, I don't know, a football player or an athlete or whatever? It can't be that serious. Like, what are you doing? So yeah, like, the same way we have to declare our passports when we get a new job or when we're flying out the country, or I don't know, walking into a bar when someone asks you for ID. Why can't it be the same for when you're creating accounts? Like name, address, where you live, your national insurance number if needs be. Like let's just make these things happen. And yes, these social media companies do have a responsibility. Like again, you can't afford to have your head in the sand with all that's going on. Yeah, I just believe that they also have a duty of care and a duty of responsibilities. And it shouldn't have taken the Euro 2020 just the abusive abuse that the players suffered. It shouldn't have taken it to get to that, but I guess here we are. So let's just try and move forward and make these changes.
And I think,
and do you agree on that, Gurmej? Oh, sorry, go on.
So I was going to say, Anyika hit the nail on the head. These people are just sad. They're just, it is sad that people have to create that many accounts to try and abuse someone. And it's like, if you really want to do it, then yeah, show your face, and then let these guys who you're abusing know who you are. If you're that brave, then do that.
It's an incredible amount of admin, isn't it, to go and create 20 accounts and keep it going? It's bizarre behavior, really.
Yeah.
But I guess the counter argument you sometimes see to this is that there are plenty of columnists or politicians out there spewing, maybe in a more dog whistle way, as we talked about, and they're not anonymous. So what's the kind of spin off there? What more do we need to do in that sense, I guess?
I think the media need to call them out. When politicians are doing this kind of thing, and there are certain elements of the media that don't help. We saw just before Brexit, some of the language that was used around the swarm of immigrants coming into the country. And I also say to people that I'm a third generation. My grandfather came over in the 50s. My parents came over in the 60s and 70s. Look at the new immigrants that have come in now. They also suffer. The people from Eastern Europe, they have to deal with racism on a, maybe not to do with skin color, but in a different way. And the way that some of the Eastern Europeans have been treated over the last few years is terrible. And the media have got a role to play in that as well.
No, I think you're right there. And again, just to kind of segue on to another question that's been raised, Thomas Wafen asks, how can the public force these huge companies to actually listen and take action? And stick with you on that, Gurmej, because I think the impact your kind of note to England hockey had last year, you've clearly already had an impact, and you forced a review on things internally in the sport. Even on a bigger scale, how do you think the public can create pressure to make these things change?
In terms of what's going on in social media? Sorry, I'm just trying to understand.
Right, in these huge companies, whether it's the media, it's social media, what do you think the public can do to try and force change, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or publishers as well?
I know there was a boycott of social media for a few days from some sports stars because of the abuse that they were getting. I think in terms of the public and what they can do when it comes to publications that are, maybe using a wolf whistle to spew sort of racist behavior, it is stop subscribing to them and stop buying them. When it comes to social media, I think it's just a matter of everyone doing their bit to call it out. When you see something happening on social media, and it could be a politician, or it could be just like a fake account or whatever it is, abusing a football player or an athlete or a cyclist, whatever it might be, just respond to it, retweet it, and call it out, and let people know it is abhorrent.
And Anyika, what would you like to see the public do at large? I know that's quite a grand generic thing to ask for, but what do you think that everyday people can do to force change like this?
Yeah, pretty much the same. It is literally simple. Simply boycotting. An example that I remember last year was, this is away from sports, but I guess because I followed her because she's like an influencer. So there's an influencer in the US called Jackie Aina, and she's more hair, beauty, makeup influencer. She's one of the biggest actually in the world, and she was previously working with brands like Pretty Little Things and Boohoo, and she basically got on social media, realized that they hadn't even posted any black squares and she did the call to action for everyone, because she has that much power. She's got millions of followers on social media, on YouTube. She basically used her power and forced them into a position that was so uncomfortable for them. So she basically got all her fans to flood their DMs, flood their emails, basically publicly say that they were going to boycott the brand, write in the comments, all of this stuff until something was done. And it took them around 3-4 days to actually make a comment, make a statement, or actually put a plan of action in place. So it shouldn't necessarily be, again, on Black women. It shouldn't be on someone like Jackie to carry the load, because it is tiring. It is extremely tiring. But I guess that is, in a way, using the power that you do have and the influence that you have to call these companies out. If it is something as simple as boycott, then why not? You know, it was no different than what we experienced in the past with all these different things that were going on within social media. So this is where social media it can be effective. Like it literally can, because everyone, even if you're not on social media, everyone has access to it. So yeah, I just feel like we can force these companies to stand up and take notice by doing something as simple as just boycotting the brand or the organization, and then it kind of feeds on from there.
And just final question on social media we've had through from viewers, which ties into what you're saying there, Anyika. Steve Wilson says, for athletes on social media, for example, Tyrone Mings, the Aston Villa and England defender, who has been very vocal about racism on Twitter, how important is it for players like him to take a stand on social media? And is there a danger that athletes will leave social media due to there not being a strong enough stance to eliminate abuse, do you think?
I think with Tyrone Mings, I was so happy that he was able to, he's been very, very outspoken about all the different things that he's encountered. And it's using your power for good, because if I'm being completely honest, there was some footballers over the past year who have spoken very, very little about the racism that the Black players have encountered. I'm not talking about the Black players, because I've always said it shouldn't be on the Black athletes to speak up about it. Like, if you're going to be an ally, at least attempt to be a good one. So there have been some big, England football players especially who just chose not to speak up about it, like just post a black square and then that's it. But what conversation are you having? What outreach is going on? What are you doing? What active work are you doing to help, the players and the different communities? So one thing I loved about Tyrone is how he also called out Priti Patel and how she was stoking the fire with the comments she made about gesture politics with the knee taken. And I was like, yes, that's how it should be. Call these people out, because you, as the home set, can't just get up and just feel like, oh, I'm because it feels to me like, oh, you're just abusing the power. And people were saying, well, that's her opinion, that's her opinion. But then here, alongside with Commander-in-Chief Boris Johnson, have continued to stoke this fire. So you've continued to feed this narrative that it's okay for people to make comments about Marxism and that racism doesn't exist, and that it's okay to just, not take the knee and we can just continue to live our own lives. Like, it doesn't happen like that. It honestly doesn't. So it is unfortunately, it is on other people to do the work. I want to see more Tyrone Mings, because he shouldn't have to carry the load by himself.
And Gurmej, I guess that falls back into what you were saying earlier about, I guess, calling out the politicians, but just to fold it back into hockey as well. You talked about the women's hockey team at the Olympics, kind of, showing signs of solidarity. How important is it to come back off Anika's point about other members of the England football team, that the white members of teams are showing solidarity publicly for these causes as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's on all of us in society. It's not just, as Anyika keeps saying, ethnic minorities' duty to call out racism. And I think it is on the whole of society. And when it comes to someone like Tyrone Mings, he is a role model to a lot of young kids of all colours, all backgrounds, and also to all ages as well, really. And I was, again, very proud of him to see that he did call out Priti Patel on that, and also talk about some of his mental health battles through the Euros, because that is a huge issue of importance as well. And in terms of the abuse that they get, it's easy for me to sit here and say, Tyrone, don't come off social media because you've got a huge role to play. I mean, I don't get abused on social media on a daily basis. I don't know what that's like. I know what it's like to be abused on the street near to where I grew up and on my paper round, but on social media, I've not had that. So I'd encourage all the athletes to just keep calling it out, keep being role models to the kids of all ages and backgrounds, and together we can make a difference. We're not going to change, 600 years of colonial history in a few months, or by putting black squares on our Instagrams, or a few years or a few decades. It's going to take time. There's a lot of structures that are ingrained in society, and it's going to take time to break those down. And we have to just keep remembering that. But keep the pressure on, keep working hard at this, and at the end of the day, we're on the right side of history.
And just on that, looking ahead beyond social media now, we've had a question through from Julie Humphreys, who asks, do you think there's going to be an element of racism fatigue over the next few years, and how do we counter that and kind of keep the pressure up? And I'll stick with you on that, Gurmej, because you're talking so well on it then.
Yeah, there's always going to be people who will argue that we're going on about it too much. It's just, I mean, I've had it in hockey over the last 12 months. Even when I've spoken about it on one webinar, I've had people call me up and say, look, we have to be really careful about what we talk about here and not upset the wrong people. But that doesn't matter. Sod them. We have to just carry on, and we have to keep fighting this, because it's not, by not talking about it, we're brushing it under the carpet, and we're letting people off the hook. And it's not about going out there and, as I keep saying, calling everybody racist or anything like that. You've got to contribute. You've got to do your bit to try and help change people's perceptions about people of colour, and society has a role to play in that. Definitely.
Anyika, what are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, racism fatigue. With how I see it being played out in the next couple of years is, like we've been saying during this whole discussion, is that there has to be a change from the top down. There just has to be. Like, you can't keep having the same people in place with the same faces making the same decisions. Like, there's nothing wrong with hearing. Why would you not want, even as an organization, even in society, to hear diverse people from diverse backgrounds, diverse voices and diverse opinions? It shouldn't be a case where we have to go through, or it has to feel like, racism fatigue, like, stop banging on about it. Like I was saying, like I've been saying, imagine being in a position of privilege where you don't have to encounter racism every day. And it's not overtly like saying the N word or the P word. I'm talking like, people looking at you and just assuming that you speak a type of way or you're not English, all of those things. And it, like Gurmej was saying, it is simply just, we need to keep banging on about it. Unfortunately, we do, because we do want to see these changes. And that's why having this discussion now is great. That's why the lunch club, like Gurmej was saying, is great. It is just about having these conversations, so we don't just have to stop at the point where, it's just getting too tiring now. Can you just stop? Like, we don't want to hear about it anymore. No, just keep going on about it. It's important to just keep taking the knee. If athletes want to protest, I'm all here for it. Just show signs of support, be an ally, and let's continue this conversation. So there will be no reason to have racism fatigue.
And Anyika, I know you've spoken in the past about being palatable in white spaces, and this is the kind of thing that we want to change. Like we keep saying, it's not just about the racial slurs. It's about, I want my kids to be able to walk into any room in this country and not feel like they're an outsider. I want them to just feel like they completely blend in, and everyone makes them feel like they can completely blend in. And it's happened to me many times in my industry, in the events industry, which is a very white and middle class industry. It's happened to me in sport. Hockey is a very white middle class sport, and it's happened to me in my local pub. And I remember once, because I organised events for like Bhangra music events, where there'd be like mainly Asian people who like Punjabi music going to them, and a couple of my friends who were white happened to go with me, and they'd say to me, "Man, that was really cool, but you know what? I just felt like the odd one out, man. Like, I couldn't, I just felt like I was sticking." I was like, "That's everyday life for me."
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like, and that's how people see things. We've got a lot of work to do, but I think, as I keep saying, the media have a huge role to play in this, and we can change the perceptions of society, change the stereotypes of, like, when I was growing up, all that people thought Asian people did was be taxi drivers, corner shop owners, or doctors, and that was it. And so again, it comes down to what you see in the mainstream media.
Definitely. And again, follow on from that, another question which ties in quite nicely from Christian Walsh. What hopes do you have for the next generation, who hopefully will not have to face the same struggles you and fellow athletes and other people have faced? What hopes do you have for them, Gurmej?
Like I just said, that we can start breaking down the structures of discrimination in all levels of society, that my kids don't even look at themselves as like a different color, or coming from a different background. Yet be proud of your heritage, but in Britain we're all part of one community, that we can just feel like we're all in this together, as Anyika was talking about the what the Olympic kind of dream was for the GB team. And I think that's what I just really, really hope for my kids, because the debate has moved on a lot over the last 20 years. And I think as we start, moving to the next decade, we've got a lot of work to go, a lot of work to do. But I think the progress is being made, but there's still a long way to go on that.
Anyika, what are your thoughts on the next generation and what's to come?
Well, thankfully, because we are, being open, like I've said, about having these conversations, I know it's played such a huge part in a positive way in how athletes, not necessarily depending on the performance, but how they perceive themselves. Like, a lot of people are taking up space in spaces that they haven't necessarily be seen to be valid or valuable, and just being very open and honest. I know that with the conversations that we are having, we are starting to create change. We are starting to see it. One thing I will say, which I had a conversation with someone about this the other day, is, and they are, I'm just saying this as an example, is so I had a conversation with a young, well, not young, because he's not young at all. He's an older gentleman from older Caribbean gentleman, and he was saying about oh, sorry, can you see me? It just went
Still there.
Yeah. Went off. He was talking about, like, I was doing an event, and it was to do with motorsport and F1, and it was really, really good, actually. And how someone like me can go in communities and speaking to the kids and all of that stuff. And he was saying, like, oh, when you guys are so lucky, because back in our day we weren't allowed to talk about this. And this guy's like, I think he was like an accountant and stuff. So when we talk, he said he wasn't allowed to talk about race, and he said he doesn't necessarily think it's a good thing to be as open about it. And then the other thing he said, which kind of shocked me, was that, why is mental health such a big thing now? Like, why are we having this open discussion? And the reason, I mean, aside from me being extremely annoyed by it, but again, it's his opinion. What I realized, when you live and when you grow up in certain communities, right, all our elders have ever had to do is just kind of grin and bear it. So my mum used to work in the hospital in Liverpool, and she used to encounter racism on a daily basis. Patients would be, need attention, need constant care. And I actually saw it, because I was admitted to hospital one time when I was young. And she was looking after a patient, and this guy came in drunk, and he was just slurring, and he needed medical attention. And like he was clearly being racist, like everything he was saying now. And then I spoke to my mom afterwards, and she was just like, yeah, it's just, you just have to ignore it. You just have to, you know, just get on with your job. Just make sure they're okay. Me, I'm leaving you to die. That's just me personally. That's just me. But obviously she's a nurse, so she can't afford to do that. But it's an example of what our elders have had to do and had to deal with previously. Not being saved in a shop, not being able to go to a nice restaurant because you don't look or dress a certain way, but it's really because of your race. They've had to endure so many, even discussion about mental health. They've had to endure doing all these mental gymnastics every day on a daily basis, going to your place of work. So why should we, as adults, not the same age, but as the new generation, why should we have to keep quiet about these things? Why can't we break down these conversations about institutional and structural racism? Like, that's not, if we keep quiet and if we can continue to keep quiet about it, how are we helping the athletes coming through? Also, because we've had to struggle, they should struggle too. Like, no, that shouldn't be the case. It really, really shouldn't be the case. So I politely, and I say politely, said to this gentleman that like, yeah, I'm not in a position to keep quiet, because that's not my job. That's not what I'm here to do. My job is to use my voice, to use my experience, and to be open and honest about the things that I've encountered. So yeah, if you want to keep quiet about it and you want to continue to struggle or just go about your day-to-day job and just kind of like tiptoe around certain people or certain conversations, or you're scared to rock the boat in case you don't want to get a promotion, then that's on you. But someone like me, and as well, you know, someone like Gurmej, we're not in positions to do that.
Yeah, no, I think going back to the point, sorry, I was going to say, just, you know, going back to your point, Anyika, about what the previous generations have been through, it's, you know, it doesn't bear thinking about. Like some of the stories my dad tells me, or my granddad used to tell me, and my grandmother used to tell me, like, about what they went through, you know, working long hours in foundries and then suffering, you know, racist abuse, like, I'm talking like being attacked. And it's our opportunity now in this generation to set a pathway for the new generation to have a better life than what we've had, and more opportunities than what we've had, like our parents and our grandparents endured for us as well. So I think it is incumbent on us all to kind of do our bit. And you're right, there are people, and it's happened in hockey, it's happened in careers, that say, you know what, I don't want to say anything about it because it could impact whether I get selected for the next GB team. That's fine, and I understand that, because if you're in that bubble and you're an athlete, and I completely get that at that point, but at the same time, there are going to be people here who will support you if there are things that are going to, you know, that have gone on. And I think that, again, I keep going back to it, the media have a role to play in that as well.
Yeah, can I just add to that as well? Just before we move on, Greg, like, I can definitely relate to that, talking about you're scared to speak out because you don't want to rock the boat for your sponsors, your endorsements, your team selection is in jeopardy, your funding's in jeopardy. I had to think about that constantly, pretty much every day that I was in the sport, especially in the throughout the years of being a senior athlete. Not so much as a junior, but definitely the senior as a senior athlete. And when you'd see things happen, and then when you'd see this athlete getting selected over you, or this athlete getting funding over you, even though you've run quicker than them, or you've done a better performance than them, or you've contributed much more than they have, but you feel like you've been hard done by. Excuse me. It is extremely hard to just kind of, you know, sit there and be quiet. In the later years, I got sick and tired. So then I used to just call them out on it, because there was an incident that happened, for example, when I was taking off funding, and they couldn't give me a straight answer as to why I was taken off and why the other people around me were kept on funding. Especially when I'd beat them, I'd hit all the criteria, and I basically done my part. I did everything that I was supposed to do in order to move forward on the performance plan. And then all I saw was this defense mechanism coming up and being recognized amongst defending a lot of the white athletes, and how I'm supposed to be grateful that you're still in the sport because, you know, you're too old, and all of this stuff. Whereas when I start calling them out on it, I'm deemed a bully or I'm deemed aggressive on all of this. So it's not just about me. It honestly wasn't. Like, that's what I always tell the athletes, even back then when I was on teams. It's not just about me. It's me being in a room and speaking. So the next girl or the next male athlete who's going through something similar is able to just, it's not, you're not necessarily questioning someone's judgment in a bad way. All you're doing is just having a conversation. What made you come to this decision? Are you looking at the big picture? And I know you know how it looks. So you now need to answer me why you've come to this decision. And I used to do that. The old Anyika was scared. She was scared to ask these questions. But like the one who was later, throughout the later years, that Anyika got tired. I got tired. I got too tired of keeping quiet, of protecting other people above myself. And yeah, that's why I believe that it's important that the next generation shouldn't be in a position to struggle. And also, the same athletes who were on the teams now in Tokyo are now having these conversations with team management and questioning why they came to the decision without them feeling attacked, you know? So you're not put in a position where you feel like your funder's going to be cut, or you need to suck up to this person in order to make the team. Like, no. So that's what we want moving forward.
100%. Yeah, I think we've got time for one last question. I'll stick with you, Anyika, on it, because I think what you've talked about there in terms of your struggles in terms of an athlete and you know, your work now speaking about sport and the book you've written. We've been asked, would you recommend, this is by Victoria Anderson, would you recommend any booked literature for allies? And I thought, given you've got a book coming out in March 2022, maybe talk about that a little bit, but anything else you would recommend people look into after this call?
Yeah, so yeah, I have a book coming out. It's called My Hidden Race, and it centers around me, and it's not. The thing is that even when I announced the book a couple of weeks ago, people have sort of like questioning. One or two people asked, well, why is she writing a book? You know, she's not really that big of an athlete, and you know, she's done okay, but what's her story, and what's worth her, you know, releasing or even writing a book? And the reason is that I've gone through a lot in my career. I was one of the most long-standing athletes in British athletics history to compete in the sport of athletics, like at the highest level, world class, for almost 20 years. Like, that's an achievement in itself. But through that, there's been a journey. It's not a normal track and field book, because talking about athletics in general can be boring for people. It's not about me doing a 350 and throwing up afterwards. It's not about that. It's about just things that I've encountered, things that I've experienced. There's a lot of, I would definitely say there's a lot of explosive stories in there, without giving too much away. There are some explosive moments, and I'm just here to change the game ultimately, because I remember when I was in the process of even writing this book, there was never, how often do you see books written by Black British sportswomen? The last one that came out was Anyika Onuora, England and Arsenal former football player. But before that, you didn't really even have that many. So I'm here to change the game and break the mold. You know, essentially that's what I want to do. And having my voice heard is pivotal in that process. So My Hidden Race coming out in March 2022. Other books to read, I would recommend, I know everyone pretty much goes on about it, but Reni Adu, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I know everyone was, you know, commenting last year during the Black Lives Matter movement about Reni's book, but it is actually a really, really good book. There are so many other books out there as well, alongside, how can I not forget my brother? My brother, Emmy, he has a book called Pitch Black, which tells the story of Black British football players over the past 40 years. That is an excellent book. I'm not just saying that because he's my brother and he's like a role model, but that book is incredible. It's written very well. It tells some really, really incredible stories, very passionate stories, and it's very honest about how Black British footballers have what they've had to endure and how they've been treated within the game of football, but also in society as well.
Brilliant. I think we are going to send an email around after the event asking for feedback to all attendees. We might be able to throw a reading list in there as well, potentially. So we'll have to see what we can do. But Gurmej, is there any kind of literature or resources you'd recommend people look at after this event?
Apart from Anika's book, which I'll definitely be reading. So there's another great book called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I think that kind of puts a lot of things into perspective in terms of especially the defensiveness that sometimes people encounter when it comes to talking about race issues, and it just breaks it down in a really sort of constructive manner. And this is me getting a bit philosophical now. There's a book that I've loved reading called Sapiens. It's a short history of mankind, talking about the fact that the human race has been around for like over 200,000 years from our early ancestors, and what we're actually living in is a very, very, very small space in time. Even if we talk about the last millennium and the colonial history, it's just a small speck. And what I always try and then put into my own mind and the context of where we are is that we are going to get through this. It's just a matter of humanity progressing to the next stage, and we are all a part of that journey. So definitely I'd recommend checking out Sapiens.
I think I'd add to that as well, because I think I've read Sapiens. There's also the sequel, I think Homo Deus. So that's another one to whack on the list as well. So no, all really good shouts there. And thank you both for your time today. I think it's been a really illuminating chat, some really valuable experiences shared and some insights as well. So do you guys, a very last kind of minute or so, do you want to plug your social media platforms and tell people where they can find you? Anyika, do you want to go first?
Yes. So I am on, where have I just gone brain dead? I'm on Twitter, Twitter at Anyika Onuora. So ANNYONUORA. Instagram at Anyika, ANYIKA. And yeah, just look out for my hidden race coming out next year.
Brilliant. Gurmej?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn just as Gurmej, I think. Or you can find me as Gurmej Singh Pawar. Twitter, Gurmej SP. That's GURMEJ SP. And Instagram, events_Gurmej, GURMEJ.
Superb. Well, once again, thank you for your time. Really fascinating chat with both of you. And yeah, we're going to send around an email to all the attendees. Like I said, we'll try and include that reading list as well. But thank you for joining us, and hopefully see you at another event soon.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.